All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're heading way up north to a wild, windswept Scottish island in the Orkney archipelago. We're going to uncover a settlement that, get this, predates the Egyptian pyramids. We're talking about the Knap of Howar. It's a site that totally flips the script on how we view early human history, and honestly, that deep-seated human need to just build a place to call home. Just imagine that for a second. For literally centuries, the ruins of an ancient farming community were just sitting there, silently guarding their secrets right beneath the sand. To anyone walking by, it looked like, just another bumpy sand dune on the coast of Papa Westray. Locals walked their dogs over it, waves crashed against it, and no one had the absolute slightest clue that some of the oldest preserved stone homes on the entire planet were resting right there under their boots. Crazy, right? So part 1, the storm's hidden secret. Let's look at this 1920s discovery. Let's look at how this ancient marvel was actually brought back into the light after millennia in the dark. The funny thing is, it wasn't dug up by some highly funded, meticulously planned archaeological expedition. Nope, it was pure, sheer force of nature. After being completely buried in sand and coastal debris for generations, everything changed in the 1920s. These absolutely brutal, violent winter storms battered the Orkney coastline. Mother Nature essentially acted as her own excavator. The relentless wind and waves just violently tore back the earth, suddenly exposing these massive hidden stone walls. It was a total 100% accidental discovery that ended up rewriting the history books. And here's where the timeline gets really interesting. When a local landowner, William Trail, and his buddy William Kirkness first started digging out those exposed walls around 1929, they figured, okay, this is probably an Iron Age site. Makes sense, right? Well, fast forward a few decades. Archaeologist Anna Ritchie heads back to the site, and utilizing the modern magic of radiocarbon dating, she proved it was way, way older than anyone had even dared to guess. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't just a little older. It wasn't Iron Age at all. It was straight up Neolithic. Which brings us to part 2. Older than the pyramids, and how this site is redefining prehistory. To really wrap our heads around the Knap of Howar, we kind of have to recalibrate our mental map of the ancient world. Look at this timeline. It really puts the sheer scale of its antiquity into perspective. The Knap of Howar was built around 3700 BCE. So what does that mean? It means these exact stone walls were put up centuries before anybody even started dragging stones to Stonehenge. And it's a full 1,000 years before the very first Egyptian pyramids were even a blueprint. While the pharaohs were just starting to dream up their massive monuments, the Knap of Howar had already been a bustling neighborhood for generations. We're looking at a staggering 6,000 years of history here. Seriously, just let that number sink in for a second. 6,000 years. These walls have stood their ground against the absolute harshest North Atlantic weather for 6 millennia. That easily makes them among the oldest preserved stone homes in all of Northern Europe. It's just wild to think about. Moving on to part 3, inside the ancient homes. Let's take a look at this 6,000-year-old architecture. All right, let's essentially step inside these two connected structures to see how our ancestors actually went about their daily lives. We so often picture prehistoric people roughing it in damp caves, but the reality here is incredibly sophisticated. I mean, how on earth did a building survive 6,000 years? Well, they used dry stone construction. It's this highly skilled, almost puzzle-like method of carefully stacking stones without a single drop of mortar or cement to bind them together. And because these Neolithic builders were absolute masters of their craft, those very walls have survived over 1.5 meters high to this very day. And what's really mind-blowing is how familiar it all feels. Archaeologists uncovered the interiors preserved almost exactly as they were left all those millennia ago. We're talking stone beds, shelving units literally built right into the walls, dedicated storage cubbies, central fireplaces, and even carved stone furniture. It is, for all intents and purposes, a 6,000-year-old floor plan that you or I could walk into and immediately recognize. Now, don't get me wrong, this was still a house built strictly for survival. There were no windows, and the smoke from those indoor fires just had to kind of naturally escape through openings in the roof, which was probably made of driftwood, turf, or animal skins. So yeah, it would have been pretty dark and smoky in there. The whole setup consists of a larger main family home and a smaller workshop, and they're linked together by this narrow little passageway. It's a genuinely ingenious layout. Combined with those really low doorways, it was perfectly designed to hunker down and protect the families from those relentless, freezing Atlantic winds. Let's jump into part 4, daily life in Neolithic Orkney, focusing on Scotland's first farmers. So let's talk about the people themselves. How did these early pioneers survive in such a harsh, cold environment?
who were the families actually sitting around those stone hearths? Well, looking at their diet, they were incredibly resourceful. They definitely weren't just scraping by on whatever they could find. They were managing a really complex, balanced mix of food sources. They were cultivating crops like barley and wheat. They raised their own livestock, cattle, sheep, pigs, the whole shebang. And then they supplemented all of that by gathering shellfish and fishing the icy seas around them. It's absolute proof that they were thriving, successful early farmers who had fully transitioned away from a strictly hunter-gatherer lifestyle. And they totally weren't just isolated survivors cut off from the world, either. Archaeologists found this specific type of pottery called unstand ware. These are beautifully decorated ceramics, and they tell us something super important. Because we found this exact same style of pottery in other places, we know for a fact that the people at the Knap of Howar were plugged into a much larger, vibrant network. They were trading, communicating, and sharing culture all across Orkney and even into mainland Scotland.
Okay, this number is just absolutely wild to me. 900. Evidence strongly suggests that generations of families continuously called this exact specific spot home for nearly 900 years. Just think about that scale. For 9 straight centuries, parents raised their kids here, they worked the exact same land, they watched the exact same northern skies, and they passed their survival knowledge down, generation after generation after generation. Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, Unsolved Mysteries and Legacy. Echoes across time. Yet, despite this unbelievable 900-year run, eventually the site just fell silent. The hearths went cold, the sand slowly started to reclaim the stones, and it left us with some pretty massive mysteries to unravel. The single biggest question that archaeologists still fiercely debate today is simply why? What finally drove these incredibly resilient farmers away from their ancestral homes? After surviving and thriving for 9 centuries, what was the ultimate tipping point? We really have to wonder what forces were at play here. Did a shifting, perhaps rapidly cooling climate finally ruin their ability to grow their staple crops like wheat and barley? Or was it something else? Did coastal erosion just slowly, relentlessly bring the ocean right up to their literal doorstep? It's super fascinating to note that when these houses were first built, they actually stood much, much further inland. They were surrounded by green fields, definitely not teetering right beside the crashing ocean waves like they are today. Of course, the scientific conversation around a site this old is always evolving. There are modern archaeological studies right now debating their exact Neolithic dates. Some experts suggest they might actually belong to a slightly later phase than Anna Ritchie's original 3700 BCE estimate. But honestly, even with that academic debate, the sheer monumental significance of these structures remains 100% undisputed across the archaeological community. So, what should you really take away from this explainer? Mostly, it's a profound shift in perspective. Long before grand cities were a thing, before written languages were even invented, these ordinary, everyday people were innovative builders. They were sophisticated community makers. They absolutely were not just primitive cavemen struggling in the dark. They were the true, original pioneers of settled life in Northern Europe. To wrap things up today, the Knap of Howar serves as this incredibly powerful reminder of human endurance. It shows us that this timeless desire to just build a safe haven, a home, completely transcends millennia. Our deepest history is quite literally carved in stone. But I want to leave you with one kind of haunting question to ponder before we go. If these modest, everyday stone walls could survive 6,000 years of pounding ocean storms, what monuments are we building today that will still be standing 6,000 years from now? Something to think about. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.